Okay, so today we are looking at roots of negative numbers. So this is going to be different than when we took the roots of positive numbers, only because of one thing. When we looked at roots of positive numbers, that was quite simple, right? Because if you take two numbers and multiply them, you get another number. Well, what about if you take two negative numbers and multiply them? What do you get? You get a positive number. Okay, what if you take two positive numbers and multiply them? You still get a positive number. So is there any way for you to multiply a number by itself and get a negative number? No, there isn't. And so in actuality, if you ever find yourself doing a construction problem, a real life problem, or any real world application of a problem, and you handle an expression underneath a square root, and let's say you get an answer of -9. And so now you're saying, okay, what's the square root of -9? In other words, what number times itself will give you -9? Okay. Oh, that's easy. That's 3, right? Well, what's 3 times 3? It's 9. Okay, well, it has to be -3 then, right? Okay, what's -3 times -3? Well, let's write these down so you can see. Is it 3? Because 3 times 3 equals 9. Oh, that's not right. Okay. Is it -3? Because -3 times -3 is 9 again. Sorry, I'm laughing because 9 means no in German. At least I've been told. I saw that on an episode of Kim Possible many, many years ago in my childhood. Anyway, so 9 means no because no, that's not correct. So the square root of -9. Square root of -9 cannot be done no matter what you do in the real world, in a real world application. For those of you that go into electronics, there is a use for this, which you may or may not be covered. But so if you ever run into an issue like this when you're taking the square root of a negative number, most likely you did something down here wrong because you should not get a negative. If those of you that go on to maybe a higher level calculus course or a pre-calculus course, there is something that we have to say for this when this instance does occur, because it is applicable to the world. You actually use it again, I said, in electronics, but you will not have to use that for the things that you're pursuing in most degrees that take this your course. So anyway, roots of negatives. Take the square root of a negative number. There is no real number that works for that. There is not an integer that you can get. Just because you have negative underneath the square root does not mean your answer is negative. Now let's see this though. This time I ask you, what is negative of the square root of 9? And this would be -3. Well, why is that? What's the square root of 9? And if we think of it this way, put parentheses around it, then you put parentheses around your answer, right? And it would be easier to see that this would definitely be -3. That rhymed, man. This is so cool. Anyway, so if you have a negative underneath the square root, it is impossible. I'm gonna write that in red because don't do it. Impossible. Impossible. Okay? Negative of a square root of a positive whole number, you can do, because you could take the square root of that whole number. In this case, we got 3, and there's a negative out front, so put negative out front. Those are different problems. This is possible. This, impossible. I'm so hilarious. If only you understood that last show. Okay, so that's roots of negatives when we're talking about a square root. But as I mentioned when we first looked at powers and roots, there is one other very important root that you have to take sometimes, and that's the cube root. Okay, and as we said before, how do you denote a cube root? It has that same radical symbol, except there's a 3 there to let you know you're taking the cube root. Okay, that's kind of cool, right? All right, well, let's look at a number that we can take the cube root of. Let's look at 8. So in other words, we're asking what number can you multiply by itself 3 times and get 8? So many of you will remember from the chart that's given to you, that'd be 2 times 2 times 2 gives you 8, right? So then this must mean that our answer is 2. Because if we take the cube root of 8, we know that we're really looking at the cube root of 2 times 2 times 2. In other words, 2 multiplied by itself 3 times gives you 8. So the answer is 2. Okay. Well, what about if I were to do the cube root of negative 8? Okay, well, 2 times 2 times 2 gives you positive 8. This is negative underneath. Oh, it's impossible again, right? No. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 will equal what? Well, we just talked about this at some point. Whenever you watch the video, my time is different from yours, I'm sure. But negative times a negative times another negative. Well, there's 3 negatives. In other words, an odd number of negatives. That means our answer must be negative. And 2 times 2 times 2, we just talked about, that's 8. We have a number we can multiply 3 times and get negative 8. And that's negative 2. And guess what? That is the answer. So whenever you have a negative underneath a cube root, your answer is going to be negative, and you're just looking for the number that you multiply 3 times to get the value that's there. All right? So just because, I'll give you one more, because I like you. All right. So we have a cube root, of negative 1. So as we just said, if you're taking cube root of a negative number, your answer is negative. This is cube roots of negative numbers, not square roots, cube roots. Square roots of negatives is impossible to do for you right now. Cube root of a negative is going to be a negative answer. Okay, now we're just looking for what number do you multiply times itself and get 1? Oh, yeah, 1. Cool. All right, and so those are going to be our roots of negative numbers. For those of you that are wondering, well, why didn't you do powers with this? Because we already covered powers of multiplication, right? Because powers are just going to be when you multiply that number by itself a certain number of times. And in those instances, whenever you have an odd number of negatives, for example, if I were to ask you what is negative 4 to the third power, our answer would be negative because we have an odd number as a negative multiplying. If I were to ask you what is negative 4 to the second power, we have an even number of negatives multiplying, so your answer would be positive. Right? Okay, good. So that's roots of negatives, and I will see you soon.